Mac work here. So there's been a lot of old versions of the Mac operating system. Before Mac OS 10, they had this weird proprietary system that was pretty silly, and I don't think anybody's using it anymore. Now it's OS 10. OS 10 is Unix, which is, they've advertised as the most advanced operating system in the world, and that's a very fair statement. It was the first system. It's had the most time developing it and so on, and it's used in all the versions of the Macintosh world. The iPhone, the iPad, the Apple Watch, they all have versions of the same OS, very similar. So they originally had a Mac file system in the 84, then HFS was their file system. Then they had, that's hierarchical file system. Again, that's a very old one. Then they had HFS Plus and JHFS Plus for journaled HFS Plus. And now the modern one is Apple file system, which is a 64-bit file system. The earlier ones were like Microsoft's FAT32 with only 32 bits and a limit in the file size. So this is a 64-bit file system with a ridiculous number of addressable files. Time is stored in nanoseconds, and it's quite advanced. It has advanced hard disk encryption. The iPhone in particular has many layers of encryption and a very complicated boot up process with cryptographic verification that is extremely secure, and Macs by default want to encrypt the SSD, and that would be very secure, and many people have it encrypted these days. All right. It uses the standard for hard disk encryption. Hard disk encryption is actually amazingly complicated. It's not just AES. It has these weird special versions of AES because for some reason the NIST standard for hard disk encryption requires that you support multiple users. And each user can have their own encrypted portion of the drive that only that user can see. So that makes the encryption schemes for hard drives much more complicated than for things like files or thumb drives. Anyway, so iOS has a bunch of key bags. iOS is the portable version of Mac OS 10, used on the iPhone and their other portable devices. So it's got all these different key bags. And so when you enter your password, it derives a key from your user password, and then it has a backup password when it creates a backup, an escrow key bag, and so on. It has several different keys created at different layers when you're starting up an iPhone. So Macs have a T2 security chip, which is their equivalent of the Trusted Platform module that Windows has. And this is a cryptographic coprocessor which stores keys inside a special chip and does encryption and decryption inside a special chip so that the encryption process and the encryption key is not in the address space of the main processor at all. So even if you were to gain root control over the Mac and dump all the memory, you would not find the encryption key in there anywhere. The encryption key is in that piece of hardware, and the only way to get it out of that piece of hardware, it's supposed to be impossible to remove entirely, and I don't know of anybody that successfully removed a key from a T1. Joe Grand, a celebrity at JEF CON on hardware hacking, actually managed to steal a key from a Trusted Platform module by dissolving it with acid and reaching in with a tiny probe to find a little pin. He said he had to destroy 100 TPMs before he got it to work once. So those are the kind of thing, this is James Bond kind of stuff. This means, you're as secure unless somebody will do that. I mean, nothing is perfect, but I mean, unless you're part of a conspiracy to kill the president or something, nobody is going to spend that kind of money to get your key. So,
Is that key programmable?
I think there's some way to set the key. And it's a good question. I don't know where it comes from. I think it generates it itself inside, but it's a good question because if the key came from the outside, then you'd be able to get it. But I don't know the exact process of how it works. It's a good question, and I don't really know. Anyway, but these things are on all modern computers because they are necessary to meet the military standards. The standards require that you have a thing called a trusted platform, and that's why they call it the Trusted Platform module. You have to have this cryptographic coprocessor, and there's one in the iPhone too. And there's one in the higher-end Android phones, but not all of them. The iPhone has a thing called the Secure Element, which is the same thing, a special processor to handle the encryption and the key that is different than the main processor, so no kind of malware could ever steal your key. And the result of these special cryptographic processors is that the encryption is really very secure. And it's very rare that anybody ever gets into any of these encrypted volumes without knowing the real password to get in. So, all right, it's got something called space sharing, which seemed a little complicated and silly. All right, and so for forensic examinations, You can get expensive software to copy the whole hard drive, or you can just do a logical acquisition through the file system. Spotlight is the searching feature. You got it up here. Spotlight to search on a Mac. You can search for anything by name. It caches data. Then according to this book, files that are moved to the trash and then deleted cannot be recovered. Now, it's an interesting statement here. Now, I think you might be able to get them without the file name or the creation date because they're still in the clusters, but in practice, almost all modern Macs use SSDs, and SSDs typically perform garbage collection in the background, so the empty clusters are erased. So I haven't tested it on a Mac in the recent versions, but my impression is you probably are not going to be able to recover any deleted files from a Mac, or because the SSD will probably delete the sectors. You'll just get small fragments of data, probably not much of anything. The main recovery of all we've been doing in with Autopsy, where we get all these deleted files, that's mainly applying to magnetic hard drives, which are pretty much going the way of the dodo bird. Portable laptops almost don't have those anymore. And you're only going to be able to get those from magnetic hard drives or from SSDs that are not really implementing all the features of the SSD correctly, which is true of some of the early ones and some of the ones where a user would put in an off-brand SSD, but a normal factory-installed SSD is probably not going to have any data you can recover anymore. But it will depend brand to brand. Anyway, so journaling is real important. This was added to Microsoft NF. Journaling means it keeps track of everything it's doing, so if the operating system crashes, it remembers what it was doing. This makes the machine much more reliable because a crash will not cause a disk corruption. So we've used DMGs. You've seen these all the time. DMGs are the disk image file for the Mac, the equivalent of ISOs on a PC, and that's what's typically what an installer is. It's a DMG file. It's like a DD image. You mount it, and then you have just a mounted drive. All right. Sparse images and sparse bundles are files that can grow in size as more files are added. plist files are really important. These are the equivalent of Windows Registry. We talked quite a bit about the Windows Registry before. It's this database that has all these settings of everything you've been doing, and in Apple, you do it with the plist files. Files ending in .plist extension are just property lists for each program. So in early days, MS-DOS, if you would install a program, it would have a configuration file with the program. And on Linux or Unix, if you install a program, it has a configuration file that goes with the program. There's not a universal one like the registry on Windows, and the same thing's true of Macs. So each application will just have a plist file in the folder with that application for the properties of it. And it's a binary file with some readable strings, but there's a PL utility file to present it in a human readable form. It has a sleep image file, which has a copy of the contents of RAM. Microsoft Windows has the same thing called a hibernation file. So this is just a copy of RAM so you can wake up quickly from sleep. All right. So see, there's old versions, 2001 is when OS 10 came out. So every Mac you come across these days will pretty much have some version of OS 10, which is all Unix. Gatekeeper is the security feature that enforces code signing. You probably noticed this if you have a Mac. If you download some program from like an open source file repository, you often won't install it. It'll say this file does not have a valid digital signature and you can't install it. And you have to go into properties and accept installing unsigned things, which it doesn't want to do by default. That's Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper is what verifies that everything you're installing is actually signed and verified with a public certificate. FileVault is their encryption tool, which, by the way, this is perfect. AES 128 is perfectly fine. Nobody's getting in there without the key. Disk utility is the tool you use to create volumes and erase volumes and so on. The keychain is the password manager. There's a user keychain and a system keychain. The main thing I notice about keychain is if you upgrade from one Mac OS to the next, it almost always corrupts the keychain. If you upgrade, it will say you can't log in anymore, and when you log in, it will keep popping up error messages. It's very, very annoying. It's been that way for at least 8 years. Mac never seems to get the bugs out of their keychain. This is why when students tell me they want to upgrade to the next Mac OS, I generally say don't. You're probably better off to keep using the old one until you get new hardware. But anyway, you can in principle do it, but you better set aside like a day to struggle with it because you're going to have keychain troubles. Now, the iCloud has a keychain. And the iCloud is actually stored, at least it was at one time, on Microsoft Azure servers because Apple does not have a cloud because they can't really run servers with a damn. And Apple has access to all that data. Now, of course, that's necessary because the main purpose of iCloud is if you lose your phone, then you can get a new phone and you can download everything from iCloud. Well, that means Apple has to have access to all that stuff. And it has to not be hidden behind a layer of encryption because you have lost your old phone. You can't get the old key. So that means Apple has to have access to everything in iCloud. And that means the government and anybody else that can make a court order can get to the stuff in iCloud, which is why the FBI, for at least the last year, has been trying to target Apple to scan all of iCloud for child porn images. Because they say, you've got it, you can read it, how about you stop giving us nonsense and scan it? They say, our users' privacy matters. And they say, why are you protecting the privacy of criminals? And the battle goes on. Apple even announced they were going to do it about 6 months ago, and everybody freaked out. And they said, well, we're still going to review whether to do it. They haven't done it yet. But anyway, I would imagine that Azure is probably just doing it. I mean, Microsoft doesn't give the government guff like that. Microsoft is pretty much a branch of the government. I haven't heard a statement that they do it, but if the FBI wanted them to do it, they would just say, yes, sir. They're very much a military contractor, get along with the government kind of place. Apple is a bunch of hippies rebelling, you know. Anyway, all right. So Safari is the main browser on the Mac. And so it's got browsing history and download files and caches and cookies and all the same stuff any browser has. There's a target disk mode, which is pretty nice. You can boot up your Mac into target disk mode, and then your Mac acts like just a hard drive to be read by another system, which is a natural way to make a copy of all the data off it. One way to use it, to clone your device. And mobile devices, of course, Apple and so on, is also very important. If you have the login information, like a face or a thumbprint or a PIN, then you can totally copy the data off a phone, but you can't really do it without that. Without that, it's just next to impossible, which is by design. As a matter of fact, there's another reason why Apple gets an attitude. The reason you can't copy any data off a phone is because about 8 years ago or 10 years ago, when the iPhone first came out with those colored earbuds, they were getting stolen like crazy. It was the fastest growing crime nationwide, was everybody stealing everybody's iPhone because it was worth like $200. And you could everybody was stealing them. So the FBI went to Apple and said, please lock down the phones so they're canceled like a credit card if they get stolen, so people can't do this crime all the time. So that's what they did. And then the FBI came to them and said, hey, we can't read the data off these phones. What's wrong with you guys? And they're like, I hate you so much. You ask us to do it, we do it, and now you don't want us to do it. Anyway, so Apple totally took the maximum privacy technique. That stuff is locked up. Nobody can get in there without your iCloud password. Even the FBI, even Apple. That's how they're doing it. Anyway, all right. So iOS can have encryption, and every iPhone is encrypted before you start using it. Every modern iPhone since iPhone 3S. All right. And it creates a whole series of keys as you boot it up and log in, so every part of it is encrypted with AES 256, no less, which is something almost nobody else uses except the military. AES 128 is enough for most people, but Apple went all the way. All right. And there's the other things like iPod and all the other Apple devices. They all have a very similar layout of their files. And there's the iPhone, of course. A few things. The iPhone, of course, has all the obvious things like a browser history and email and chat and phone calls and stuff. But it also has a keyboard cache for autocorrect. It remembers what you've been typing. Screenshots. Every time you close an application, it shrinks it down. And to do that, it makes a photo of the application and saves it somewhere. So you do have like the last page of every application before it was minimized and so on. And GPS information, of course, in your phone, as well as tracking from the cell phone company that knows where you are at all times, and it can be retrieved from them without a warrant. So there's a lot of imaging software. BlackBag was the main forensic software for iPhone. It's now acquired by Cellebrite. There's Oxygen Forensics, another big one I've heard about a lot. And of course, Cellebrite is huge. And there's a lot of other products like Belkasoft and Magnet Forensics. Many people make iPhone forensic software. There's a DFU mode that you use to replace the firmware if your device won't boot, and a recovery mode. All right, so when iPhone boots up, it gets a boot code from ROM, and it verifies that an Apple root certificate authority is there. That's why you cannot boot an iPhone in anything other than an official Apple OS, which is what Microsoft tried to enforce on their Windows 8 tablets because it makes it almost impossible to put rootkits on it. It protects it from malware. When it boot up process, it verifies that the key is really signed by Apple and this has not been modified, and it won't boot up otherwise. So they're not messing around. They say, who's mostly to blame for iMessage incompatibility with Droid messaging? Boy, I don't know. I've seen a lot of articles, people screaming and yelling that if you send text messages from an Android to an iPhone, they lose their color or font or something. And the thing I used to be, 15 years ago, all my friends were mad because when they would email photographs from a Mac to a PC, they wouldn't get there. It wasn't compatible. It's, I don't know, the two companies both have a huge incentive to not get along, right? So I don't know, but it is definitely the latest thing. Their instant messages don't get along. Anyway, you can back up the iPhone. You can even back it up locally, apparently, which is kind of a weird thing to do. And here's the thing I think I mentioned before. If you use biometrics on your phone, then the cops can force you to unlock your phone because you do not have a First Amendment right to hide your face. You have a First Amendment right to not speak. So you can refuse to tell them your password, but if it's just your face, they can totally hold the phone in front of your face and you can't stop them or put your finger on it. So that's why they say if you want to hide from the cops, you should not be using biometrics. Anyway,
Your wife.
what's that?
And your wife.
And well, that's true. I don't know. Hiding from your wife is another topic. I don't know. I'm glad I don't have that one. Although I noticed a few years ago that all my happily married friends are keeping secrets from their wives, or at least they think they are. I'm not a marriage counselor. I have a feeling something's wrong there, but what do I know? Nothing. That's what. Anyway. They got location forensics, of course. You got information about where you've been going, what Wi-Fi you've been going to, and the GPS and so on. Checkmate and Checkbrain are two exploits to defeat Apple security and jailbreak the iPhone. And the thing that caught me, the guy that made Checkmate was in my classes here about 5 years ago, was a Google engineer, took the exploit development class and developed these exploits on iPhone, the first new jailbreak in 7 years. So that was great. I didn't teach him much. I just got him started, then he raced a mile ahead to do that. But anyway, all right, there's an Apollo tool that will pull SQLite databases with information like the location databases and so on. So if you're going to examine the Mac, you try to figure out what kind of Mac you have, what ports are available, and then copy what kind of evidence you can get. The perfect thing would be to have one of these expensive acquisition softwares and the right plugs and get all the data I've done sleazier things like just write a script to do a live data acquisition, which is what you would do in sort of incident response. You can remember, you don't always have to use perfect procedures. You just have to document procedures and be willing to testify in court saying, here's what I did. If your customer is not willing to pay for somebody that has the perfect procedures, you can still find evidence. You can just take photographs of the screen, you are the evidence, testify in court. I found it on this device. The technical details are not necessarily the limiting factor. Although, if you do it all the time and you charge a lot of money, then you probably get the right equipment and be professional about it. Whatever you do, be careful and write down what you do and never lie about what you did. Even if you made a mistake and ruined it, just tell the truth. That will always be better than trying to cover it up. Anyway, so then there's the Internet of Things, all these other devices that now everything is smart these days, your refrigerator, your light bulbs, your car, just everything's on the bloody Internet. And therefore, there's tons of data on all that stuff. And it's relatively hard to get off, of course, because they don't have unified operating systems or plugs or anything. So everything got Wi-Fi, 5G, and Wi-Fi 6 going out. Shodan is a tool that will let you search for devices with it. What Shodan does is search. Now, Google searches web pages by content, what's on the page. Shodan searches for devices by what type of device they are, like what version of operating system they're running. So you can search for this particular model of light bulb or security camera or something. And so you could use it to search for closed circuit TV cameras in a particular area. So you can find out who you might want to try to get video evidence from. Alexa records audio. I think that's the Amazon one, Amazon Alexa. And so these smart speakers were all over the place. And from what I've read, most people have quit using them. I don't know anybody actually still uses them much. I guess one person, but they were all the rage about 2 years ago. And then, of course, the smart fitness watchers and the Apple Watch and everything is keeping track of everything you do. And that's got data in it, too. And cameras. All right, and of course, then you have police wearable cameras all over the place, which a lot of police are wearing, but a lot of them turn it off before they beat people up. A lot of them, the police department unions refuse to provide the data and stuff like that. But we are getting to be quite a few cases where that camera evidence did come out and help deal with police brutality cases and such, so that's good. And there's, of course, the huge scandal, endless scandal about the Ring doorbells. Amazon has 10 of these Ring doorbells, and when they first put them out, they said, of course, by default, everybody will share all this data with the police. We'll just sign you up for that. And then some privacy people said, maybe I don't want to sign up for that. So they tried to switch it to where from default in to default out. And I'm not sure where it is, but I think a lot of people do, in fact, voluntarily choose to share that with the police because they think it's a way to secure their home. So that hopefully they can catch, like, if there's burglars in their neighborhood and stuff. Anyway, I didn't know this one. They say police in China have smart glasses that can scan you and detect criminals. That's what the Google Glass was supposed to do. The Google Glass came out about 6 years ago. You had a glass with a camera. You could videotape anything at any time, and it was supposed to do face recognition so you could tell if the person you're talking to is rich or if they're a criminal or something. I don't know if they ever got that feature fully up, but they advertised that that was where it could go, and they say in China they've got that going. We could have that, but the Google Glasses were highly controversial because in the first place they looked ugly. And in the second place, people felt like it was an invasion of privacy. So it never went anywhere. However, there's been a lot of rumors that Apple is very soon going to come up with some Apple glasses, so wearable glasses that will do the same thing. And DJ Spinning says Google's working on Google Glasses again. A lot of people think there will be glasses so we can do this. So your email can just pop up in your visual field and you can ask questions about the things you're seeing. Just telling you where to drive would be good, where it tells you to turn left here, turn right there. And telling you if somebody you know is on a facial recognition database of a bad person. That seems like something people would like, although there are privacy issues. Anyway, we'll see. Police vehicles have this thing called cellular vehicle to everything. This is a standard to do communications. It allows them to be connected to the internet and uses a special router. There are several special wireless protocols for things that might be going fast, like cars and trains, and this is one of them. And then, of course, we talked about vehicle forensics. Modern cars are smart devices, and they're all full of they got a network, a car area network, and they have all kinds of records and the GPS and all kinds of other things of what you've been doing. And so, like I say, there are low-tech solutions to high-tech problems. For example, they've got dogs that can sniff and smell the chemicals from electronic devices. All right. And as I mentioned, there's low-tech forensic procedures like just paging through things and taking photographs of it so you get the evidence off. That's part of the evidence, and it's better than nothing. Anyway, all right, that's all I wanted to say about that. Let's try a Kahoot, which should be here. By the way, I had a friend who called me a couple days ago. The company got ransomware. And I was able to put him in contact with one of my friends who does this professionally, and I'm glad I did because he immediately told him what to do, which I didn't know. So I was talking to him about whether you should pay the ransom or not. This other guy said, don't even talk about that. Unplug everything from the internet and then call me back. And I said, oh, yeah. That's a smarter first move, isn't it? I'm sure glad I handed you off to somebody with experience. But that's the thing to do. If a bad thing like that happens to you, you need a consultant with experience. You need somebody that's done it before. And they're available. I don't know what happened. I'm sure they're still in the chaos phase of trying to figure out what to do. He said there are backups. But they also probably stole the data, so who knows. It's complicated from this point on. But anyway, at least he's got competent advice to do what you can about it. I mean, this is the same as all security incidents. There's going to be a lot of work and a lot of suffering, but it's a whole lot better if you have a competent person to guide you through it. So where are the encryption keys? At the T2 chip, they call it. All right. All right, so what files are like registry files? The plist files, property lists. All right, which feature enforces code signing? It's called Gatekeeper. I remember I saw in the news about a year ago there was a Gatekeeper bypass that I think was so simple that all you had to do was zip a file and anyway, there's something really simple that would bypass Gatekeeper. You could get it to install something unsigned. But I assume they patched that. But anyway, that's the security feature, and like all of them, it's not perfect. Anyway. And what do police cars use to reach the internet? That's this one, CV2X, and there's other ones used by like BART and Amtrak and airplanes and stuff. There's a bunch of these protocols for moving devices. All right. Good. And good. Okay. Oh. So let me stop that recording.